Now we'll talk about critical discourse studies in applied context, in the context which actually people work, instead of looking at critical discourse studies or analysis from merely a theoretical perspective. It is very important these days to look at it from an applied or practical perspective. How language or discourse is developed in the real work context, how people use or employ certain kind of discourses while performing their jobs. So applied contexts may be referred to as those contexts where the actual use of language happens in various spheres of life. Uh, these are uh, uh, these applied uses of discourse, or the uses of discourse in applied context, has certain principles which has been talked about recently. We'll just find some traces of such uses uh, in various works in CDA, and we'll see the possibility of how much further work is needed to be done in this regard. Critical discourse studies can obviously be applied to understand the nature of large-scale economic shifts in rich post-industrial countries over the last 50 years. And this can help us understand how this progress was accompanied by a certain kind of discourse, and how far language or linguistic tools or discourse varieties helped us to record, understand, or prosper this progress. We may be able to understand the concept like post-Fordism, information society, knowledge economy, liquid modernity, neoliberalism, and network society. These all these terms are the assets of post-industrial societies, usually rich societies. So these terms not only reflect a certain linguistic phenomena, but also reflect the progress of certain countries, which we can obviously understand, which we may critically understand by using critical discourse studies in the applied context in which these terms are employed. In order to understand the depth of communication rise for this economic exchange, Fairclough uses terms like textual mediation of social reality, how social reality was modulated, remodulated, reformulated through purposeful text mediations, interventions. Then we see this semioticization of contemporary life. This has been used by other researchers. Then Lidima and Sacris use the term new textualization of work. By work, we mean applied context in which discourses are generated. In modern era, workers are supposed to speak and write in ways not commonly or directly associated with the work. They have to sometimes speak about things which do not happen in their work, and sometimes they have to write about the work or the things which happen during their work. A number of critical language scholars, for example, Norman Fairclough, Deborah Cameron, Monica Heller, have been talking about the ways language has been centered and affected as part of the broader post-industrial communication of knowledge and communication, and a commodification of knowledge and communication. Communication itself has become a commodity. It's not only a way to sell certain commodity, rather communication itself has become a commodity. It makes rich countries, industrial countries, not only sell multiple means of communication, rather good communicators themselves are a good commodity these days. For many, for example, Heller and Cameron, the iconic example of these new forms of laboring are the postal children. Postal children are call center workers, the workers who work in call centers. Here we have an industry or an entire workforce where we have deterritorialized people, disembodied. and they talk to other people on phones, and they highly reliant on their talk for living. As effective they would be in their communication in satisfying the people on phone, the more useful they would be for this industry, and more money they can generate from this practice. So language is not just a way to sell commodity, it itself has become a commodity. The focus of Monica Haller's research, consistent with Eidemann's crease, is an interest in understanding how so many different working contexts have come to depend on language as both a process or a vehicle and a product of outcome of laboring, and what she dubs as word force. So words, employing good words itself has become a job. This is a world where factory workers and medical doctors alike are no longer simply doing for the work. For example, making things or fixing people, but they must also be able to reflexively talk about their work. They have to write down something, they have to speak about it something. In other words, they must be able to write it up and talk about it and generally put it into words. So communication has become an important professional trait. This is also a world where a range of low-paid workers are additionally exploited and typically under-remunerated for their linguistic multilingual abilities. Against this backdrop and within this context, we might reasonably expect to find critical discourse studies core engagement with applied context. In this backdrop, where people's linguistic abilities are exploited, sometimes they are paid only for their linguistic jobs, and sometimes they are not paid for their useful contribution, linguistic contribution to their jobs. So, and some kind of professional economic exploitation happens. Some kind of power relations are negotiated here. This is probably is the plane where critical discourse studies can come into action in applied context. A founding ideal of critical discourse studies is to improve people's lives and to have a deep look on social change by feeding our critiques. So, as we know, one of the important goals of critical discourse analysis has been to change people's life by giving them more awareness about the about the use of language around them and how they may possibly be exploited by those users. So, and this in this way, having a changing people's life and having a look at various changes that might affect their lives. Therefore, how the patterns of force are changing in various applied contexts, as I've just talked about, how the use of language is becoming more important in various forms of professions. This can be critical for the analysts working in the field of critical discourse studies. So there seems to be a dire need to move our studies in critical discourse analysis towards these applied contexts also. And we should not reduce ourselves to only media discourse or political speeches, etc. Rather, we should move towards the discourse in and about these applied contexts also. There is another need of socially committed research that contributes to the understanding and tackling of social problems. Research that is problem oriented and which offers practical implications and applications. So we need to find ways and make critical discourse analysis more practical by moving into these applied contexts. Speaking for themselves and writing specifically for applied linguists, Fairclough and Woodick top their own list of critical discourse studies core principles with addressing social problems. They believe that the core principle of a critical discourse study is to address social problems, and simultaneously there is a need for socially committed research that treats analysis of discourse as a model of social action. It may not be a verbal. It may not only be a verbal critique. Rather, it should give people some plausible ways to avoid exploitation, to bring positive changes into their lives. And again, I would say one of the best ways is to move into these applied contexts, actual working context of various professionals, so that we can let them know how they are undergoing certain kinds of exploitations. In many projects, or in many respects, CDS, Critical Discourse Studies, is a project of critical language awareness, which focuses on making people aware about different roles of language in their individual, personal, social, and institutional lives. And the idea is always to raise awareness of the way text and talk function in people's lives within the so-called public sphere. And this is the same sphere where they can exploit others, or they may be exploited by others. So providing people awareness is very important to create a healthy society where language is manipulated to a lesser level. Lynn has given 3 areas where she sees a critical discourse analysis being employed in applied linguistics: the studies of textbooks and social curricula and school curricula, then school leadership and student identities, how student identities are constructed, then public media discourse. And according to Mehboob and Paltridge, critical approaches are used in the study of language policy, language teaching, learning, and testing. And these are very healthy signs that these fields are flooded by various critical studies. But as I said earlier, we need to focus more on applied context now, so that we can reach to and address the practical problems of the people, and we can provide them some practical and plausible solutions. And this is possible only when we will take our critical discourse analysis to the discourse produced in and during these applied contexts.